Welcome to All at Sea. Now, I've been a cruise presenter or cruise enhancement speaker for some 25 years, and I'd like to actually share some of my work with you so that I can broaden the enjoyment for everybody. So here we are on a free cruise around the world with various talks, which All at Sea will present to you. I like to think that my company Alchemy broadens the mind of my audience, simply turning lead into gold by illuminating you, educating you, and having a little bit of fun along the way. And I'd like to say thank you to my friend Sergio Lievano of Drawing Elephants in Switzerland for the cartoons that you'll see along the way in this introduction to All at Sea. I have 52 talks, like a pack of cards, like you saw on the alchemy slide, and they are along three themes: perfumery, which was my career; mysteries, which is my hobby and my undertaking nowadays; and travel, which of course we do on a cruise ship. So you're going to get a mix of all of these in All at Sea. Now, I started by unlocking my book History's Mysteries and looking at various mysteries throughout time. And as some of you already know, I looked at The Man in the Iron Mask, the true identity of William Shakespeare, the playwright, as opposed to the actor, and the serial killer of Whitechapel in London, Jack the Ripper. You then got a sample of a trip to Norway, where I told the story of the mystery of figgy pudding, Christmas pudding, and Widdershins pudding as a prelude to my talk on trolls. And the stories here are that one was about getting rid of evil spirits in your house, exorcising your home if you like, whilst the other was about bringing mischief into your home. Now, I'm also, for my sins, a decoder, a puzzler if you like. So another story that will come along is about the Marseille Tarot cards and their link to the Cathars and the greatest genocide in Europe, in France in fact. Then we'll look at decoding the message, the enigmatic message on the monument at Shugborough in Staffordshire in England. When, how and where the first European settlers in North America came along, the Vikings in fact, is going to be another story. And the graffiti, the cave graffiti in Royston in Bedfordshire, England, decoding that will be another one. The priest Berenguer Saunier, made famous by the first book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and then by the Da Vinci Code, will be the topic of another talk, and its link with hallucinogenic mushrooms, the psilocybin and the fairy mushroom Amanita muscaria. What was all that about? Atlantis is another theme that is discussed in my talks. I believe that it did exist and was somewhere in the Caribbean area. And then I'll open my book on alchemy and explain to you what it actually was, what it means, and its significance for today. And the Shroud of Turin will come under our gaze. Is it a genuine article, some 2,000 odd years old, or is it a hoax? We'll see. Another mystery from France in the 50s, in my lifetime indeed, the day of St. Anthony's fire, a sort of modern day plague that was linked to hallucinogens, ergotism. Ergot of rye is molecularly akin to lysergic acid, LSD. So there's a few mysteries from my mystery book in the mix, but then I'd like to talk about the career I've had in perfumery, which might not sound exciting, but it genuinely is. In 2007, I presented myself to 5 multimillionaires on Dragon's Den in the UK. The idea being that you go with an idea that could be profitable and present it looking for money to support it. And from these 5, I gained support from the guy in the middle, Theopophytus, and the guy to the far right, Peter Jones, for my business Sense of Time, which rediscovered perfumes lost in time and made them again for today's modern market. And if you're interested in some of the background to this, the proof if you like, then this first book, Dragon's Den, Success from Pitch to Profit. It wasn't successful, but I'd like to take you on the journey anyway. So how good's your German? Der Indiana Jones der Lüfte, the Indiana Jones of perfume. That was how the media described me in the early 2000s as I went rediscovering and recreating 5 or 6 perfumes lost in time. And here they are. Obviously, to keep costs down, I used the same bottle and the same packaging, but my perfumes were all different and all linked to genuine finds either of formulae or of the product itself. I worked for what is now the largest fragrance company on the planet and had the use and the support and work of top perfumers in recreating what I'd found and bringing it to the marketplace. Here they are: Nenofar, Ankh, Nightstar, Maya and Pixis. And I also created an educational tool which helped people work out the fragrance direction. Fragrances, if you like describing them, a little bit like music. If you like jazz and folk music, you might not like heavy metal and so forth. So in these different tribes, for want of a better word, of perfumes, it would help you find, in this case, Pixis, the lost perfume of Pompeii, the fragrance area that it's in. So if you like certain fragrances in a certain area, you are likely to like Pixis if it's in that same area. So this was a help, a tool, if you like, to consumers from Sense of Time. Nenufar, from the blue lotus flower, the perfume of that flower, was the favourite fragrance of Queen Cleopatra. And in the boy king Tutankhamun's tomb, balls of Kaifi incense were found, and Ankh was created from that aroma. I lived 3 years in Mexico, and there was an expression, para mí las mayas, para mi esposa las playas. My wife liked the beaches, I liked the ruins of the Mayan civilization. And I went a number of times to Chichen Itza, and there in the sacred cenote they found balls of copal incense. So Maya was created with that as a heart, the copal, but also other aromatic substances from Mexico, such as vanilla. And then we have Pixis from a perfumer's garden in Pompeii, from the seeds, although Pompeii was incinerated, from the seeds and flowers and herbs in his garden, we could work out and recreate, a bit like a scene of crime reconstruction, a fragrance that he would have constructed. And then there was Nightstar, the real heart of the ocean, a perfume from a number of samples found in the debris field of Titanic within a bag belonging to a guy called Adolf Safelt. And the perfume, the anointing oil of the kings and queens of England, held here by Elizabeth I, was my next project. And although Sense of Time didn't quite work out, I think it was perhaps a little bit too complex for today's modern audience. I did, from 2010, 2011, correspond with the person, the Duke of Norfolk, who organises coronations, knowing that one day one would come up, as indeed it did. And I advised on the anointing oil of the king, because the early anointing oil had animal derivatives in it, but this, thanks to reformulation, certainly did not have animal derivatives in it, and King Charles III was anointed with the new oil. And as you can see, these perfumes encapsulated some 3,500 years of human history. So now we come to the story of Night Star, the perfume from a bag of samples in Titanic. Here's a picture of one of the leather wallets, and the glass files which contain samples were actually inside little, if you like, little aluminium, like a cigar tube, I guess. Lots of different raw materials, but some were perfumes of first order. And again, in the story of Night Star, you'll hear of the adventure of Adolf Safelt, who was going to America with his samples. And the story is not just about Night Star the perfume, but it's a human story of 4 people, 4 survivors on Titanic, all in some way linked to the story of Night Star. I worked on perfume from yet another shipwreck, a perfume I call Bonnie Blue. You'll see why in a second. But this was the Mary Celestia that ran aground in the Bahamas. As you can see, the Bahama Bank is a graveyard of ships, and down towards the bottom, the Mary Celestia. Not the more famous Mary Celeste that was abandoned, but another ship with that name, Mary of Heaven. Now that project was unfinished, but the name Bonnie Blue was because that was the first flag, the Bonnie Blue, the star if you like, the white star on the blue background of the Confederate flag. And the Mary Celestia was a gun runner, a blockade runner, taking guns and ammunition to the deep south in return for cotton in the main. I was originally a scientist, a chemist, working on Perfumery, and as you can see from that first book, by the Royal Society of Chemistry, and then moved on to more consumer-related books on fragrances, like this one, Kodo, The Way of Incense. And this led to another talk and another trip to Japan, where I worked in an incense factory. They make indeed for the Emperor of Japan and sell large bundles of incense to Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines, and the like, including, of course, Japanese consumers. But this is from the 11th, 12th century Japan, the game of Kodo. Everybody probably knows about Seido, the tea ceremony. Not many know about Kodo, the incense ceremony, where ladies would mix certain substances together, burn them, and their friends had to guess what was in them. Of course, both incense and perfumes contain an awful lot of spices, and that led to my story, The Scintillating Story of Spices. So we've had examples of my presentations on both mysteries and perfumery for you to look forward to. I would urge you to subscribe, and then as and when these come along through this year and next year, you can catch up on all these different presentations. And now, of course, because we're doing sea voyages, I had to put together some presentations on travel. And having lived and worked in Mexico for 3 years and then traveled throughout Latin America and in particular Peru, I put together a talk from Aztecs to Zapotecs, which tells the stories of these great Aztec, Mayan empires and also the Incas of Peru. My interest as a codebreaker led me to discover the true identity of William Shakespeare the playwright, as opposed to the actor who did indeed exist. And of course, being on board cruise ships, where cruisers will complain about most things given the chance, from food to their cabins, I just had to put together a talk on mutiny. This story on whales and whaling is fascinating, and I give it warts and all. Thank goodness nowadays we protect these wonderful creatures. But history is history, and you see this book, Memorias de un Valerio. I actually met somebody who in the 70s whaled from a small ship like this one, down in the Azores. So again, a interesting and fascinating presentation. Of course, I tailor my talks to the audience as well as the itinerary. And if we're going to the Caribbean, and if it's in school holidays and kids are going to be on board, of course there has to be a talk on pirates. And finally, a little bit of fun. Led by the nose is poetry, humour about our senses of smell and taste. Transports of delight, more serious poetry, taking us around the world using our nose. Now let me give you an example just to whet your appetite. The nose. The nose, it is a wondrous thing. It lets all kinds of smells go in, gently warms them in its maze and probes and checks that scented haze, then lets you know it's cardamom, or aniseed, or fruity gum. It sorts the jasmine from the rose. How does it work, do you suppose? 10,000 odours it can tell, this providential sense of smell. A Nobel Prize awaits the one who figures out how this is done. And so, with the cartoon help of Sergio Lievino, who I mentioned earlier on, I produced a book that would make you smile, and then hopefully a presentation that would make you laugh. And I hope keep on laughing with our work on tombstones or tomb readers. Cheers. So, sit down, subscribe, and cruise the 7 seas with me. You're welcome aboard.